bedroom to the lounge wasn't good today. It took me a good minute and a half. It's hard to believe, actually. It's only a month ago since our last ambassadors event. It was March the 2nd. We were talking about training and apprentices as well. So much has happened in such a short period of time. We decided to put on a special event about COVID-19, which is obviously dominating the news and will do for months and months to come. Delighted to say that 150 people have registered for today's webinar. I'm told the sandwiches were particularly good in Lisa's house. Don't know about anybody else's as well. The format today will be pretty simple. I'm going to come to Steve Rumbelow first, then I'm going to speak to our panel of 4. We've been submitted a number of questions beforehand. I have to say all but one of them are about furloughs, so that's not relevant to all our speakers as well. So if you've got a question you want to send, you can send it through. So I'm going to start with Steve Rumbelow, the Chief Executive of Rochdale Borough Council. Steve's actually been coming into work every day. He's assumed the role, if anybody remembers the film Night at the Museum, because he's taken it upon himself to feed Dippy the dinosaur. Dippy's in the background as well. Just tell us, how is the council functioning at the moment, Steve? Because obviously it's been a difficult time for everyone.
Well, I think clearly it's an unprecedented crisis. I think it's important to recognise as well that it's the sort of crisis that none of us have experienced before in terms of its longevity, and we're still very much in the immediate response phase. And I think the first thing for the council was we first of all understood what we needed to do, and that was first of all to stop the disease spreading. Secondly, to try and protect and shield people that were the most vulnerable. And then thirdly, it was about making sure that social fabric didn't disintegrate. And that's been achieved, I think, because of strong political leadership, supported by senior managers, but crucially, it's all about our staff. Our staff have just been bloody amazing. We've got lots of our staff, of course, working from home to support that strategy, but a lot of our staff can't work from home because they deliver services that communities rely on that can't be delivered from the comfort of your front room in the way that you're working now, Chris. So we've got hundreds of yellow jackets out there doing this sort of services, picking up the bins, filling potholes, making sure the streets are still clean. We've got lots of social workers that can't do the services out there that are supporting the most vulnerable in our communities. And I think that's really important to recognise that those people are really making sure that the sort of social disruption that that this crisis is creating, that we've never had before, is minimised by making sure those basic services just get done. Certainly here in Rochdale, our bin service is exactly as it's always been. We've not even had to reduce those services at this stage. Now, that might come if we start to lose more and more staff, but the important thing, I think, is to underpin that. In the early stages, we mobilised very quickly. We set up 4 emergency response hubs. We set up an emergency helpline. We sent a leaflet out to all 95,000 households in the borough. We got about 2,000 contacts through that emergency helpline. We're delivering food parcels, medicines, and any kind of support, including outbound calls, just to try and deal with the social isolation that some people are facing, just to make sure they get a chat and some support and a friendly voice on the end of the phone line.
Well, we know you're busy at the moment because Dave Barrington has just messaged on the WhatsApp group. We lost some of what you said then, Steve, because the binman turned up to empty his bin. So that's a positive sign. Like most people, and like most chief execs, I dare say you are watching every single announcement from the government, and people now expect you to be an expert. So I'm going to ask you a question. I mean, a lot said about the business rates. What's the council's position as regards to business rates, and how much discretion is there for a council like Rochdale?
Well, the government scheme was announced quite quickly, and as often happens when things are announced quickly from the government level, it was announced as a policy decision without the detail. So we have struggled throughout the crisis in some ways with those sort of national messages, and the details not caught that up for a little while, but people don't realise that. So we've been working hard on that. The 2021 retail relief scheme is already implemented here in Rochdale. All eligible businesses have already had the zero bill, so that's good. We've been working through, we've got a Business Matters website that people will hopefully be familiar with, and 950 people signed up to that. That was a monthly newsletter. It was a monthly newsletter. It's now a weekly newsletter, and that's been helping us get information out to businesses. But we know there are still gaps, and what we're asking businesses to do if they're not eligible for rate relief and they're in difficulty is to talk to the business rates team direct. And to remember all the other things that are in place. I mean, you've got a lot of questions this morning about furloughing, but that could be a really helpful thing. And of course, there are lots of arrangements being put in place for business loans. And what's really important, I think, for businesses is to talk to their own bank as well.
You mentioned actually the Business Matters. Carol Hopkins, a colleague, has been putting that together actually. She's changed her name to Business Matters right now as well. In terms of helping businesses, I mean, helping residents is key, but helping businesses has been pretty critical as well. I mean, are there any other measures that you've taken to support businesses?
Everything that we've done is set out on the council's website, so that's a good reference point. And we're also working closely with the Greater Manchester Business Growth Hub as well to make sure that we're linking businesses into anything that they can offer. We've dealt with hundreds of calls clarifying eligibility for support, directing people, signposting people to the right places, dealing with financial and trading questions, and we'll continue to do that. We've also been supporting businesses that have remained open. I think it's important to remember that the vast majority of businesses are still trading, and so we've supported them in terms of advice on social distancing in their particular setting. I guess a sort of three-step process. First of all, advice. There are then compliance checks, because that's part of our regulatory function, and if required, we're prepared to take enforcement action as well.
You've got, I think I'm right in saying, Steve, and it won't come as any surprise, anybody's seen the suits that you wear, you've got £42 million burning a hole in your back pocket at the moment. And that's business grants that you're giving back to businesses in Rochdale, between £10,000 and £25,000. How's that going along?
It's going well. Again, it was one of those things where the announcement came and there wasn't the detail behind it to enable us to start making the payments immediately, and that was a little bit frustrating. And actually the figure's gone up now. It's £46 million we expect to pay out, Chris. As of yesterday afternoon, we'd got £17.5 million out of the door. That'll be increasing again today. We've got 30 members of staff working mainly remotely to get that money out to businesses. Some of the practical difficulties we've had is for some businesses, we don't have the bank details, and clearly that means that we need to make contact with the business, particularly with some of the smaller businesses that are below the business rates threshold. So that is work that's ongoing at the moment. The paperwork is all on the council's website though, so businesses can look on the website and can apply using the paperwork on that website.
Obviously, if those people have not been into Rochdale town centre for a while, they won't have seen it. But in terms of the £80 million website development, obviously the official opening's been delayed, but the M&S food store has opened. I hear it on good authority that you've been in there to buy some stuff as well. Where are we in terms of that, and where are we in terms of Riverside? You know, the £80 million opening scheme.
Yeah, well, M&S opened the food hall on Monday, and yes, they don't limit the amount of wine you can buy, so that's a good thing. I think the other thing to say is, on a morning like this, from the hills around Rochdale Riverside, that sort of copper colour just looks fantastic, shining out from the town centre. But M&S are open. Of course, all the other stores that were due to open on the 6th are not open, although because they're all retail and leisure schemes that are not allowed to open. So we've got a lot of fit out being done, although some of that of course has been constrained by some staffing issues, but we've got Next, H&M, Boots, Nando's, Real Cinema, Puttstars, Superdrug, JD Sports, River Island, Greggs signed up already, and they will be opening at a later date, and that's postponed until we understand where the lockdown's taking us. Boots are of course allowed to open. They've had some difficulties with their fit out, so they're not open at the moment, and we're not quite sure when they will be opening, but they do intend to open as soon as they can get that fit out completed. The car park is open. At the moment that's free. We've kept that free for the time being, on the basis that it can provide a parking for M&S customers, and importantly for key NHS and council staff who need to be in work.
you can see in the background, people will be able to see that our good friend Dippy is still hasn't put any weight on since we saw him last. So he had over 100,000 visitors actually at the last count. I think but obviously people are visiting at the moment as well. I mean, obviously it's due to be in Rochdale between February and I think June. Is there any opportunity that Dippy's stay might be extended? Because I know you've formed a deep and meaningful relationship with Dippy now. Because it's
we get on really well.
I
mean, it was a triumph, and it was tragic, really, that the crisis intervened. We had 115,000 visitors in the first 5 weeks of hosting Dippy, and the feedback from those visitors that came from all over the country, indeed all over the world, was just amazing. So it's been fantastic, and it's also, I think it's important to recognise that there's also a sort of an educational aspect to it, and so it is about inspiring the next generation of scientists, and that was something that we were really working hard on. We're in discussions with the Natural History Museum about reopening the exhibition and extending it. We're not quite sure when we'll extend it to, but we're very strongly suggesting that we've got to ensure that we can get the school trips that didn't get fulfilled to see Dippy. They need fulfilling. Therefore, we're arguing that we should keep him after September. If we don't get agreement to that, then we'll kidnap him, and we'll make sure that we get those children in to see him.
I've got a number of questions about rates, and they're coming in as we're talking. I've been sent one as well, so I'll deal with them all together. The question for you, Steve, obviously, is who is eligible for the grants?
For which grants? For the 25,000. The details are on the website, and I think that's the easiest thing for people to do, to look on the website, because the eligibility for both grants is different, and I wouldn't say complicated, but it's important that businesses understand where they fit so that they're applying for the right support.
And I suppose this would fall into the same category. From Steve Barton of Barton Kendall, there are many businesses who rent premises where the rent is an inclusive sum of the rates. As a consequence, they are unable to apply for the business grant, and yet they are independent businesses. This is having an unfortunate and I suspect unintended effect on what they are generally are generally small businesses in desperate need. Are the speakers aware of this, and do they know of anything coming down the pipeline that may help them? I suppose the answer is probably no.
Well, we're certainly aware of the problem, and we've raised it with government. We've raised it through Greater Manchester. There's been a letter from Sir Richard Leese to government on it. We've also made direct contact. It is a problem. Splitting the business rates and the rent in some cases can be a problem. It needs input from the valuation office agency. They are trying to do desktop assessments, as we understand it, but quite often saying that it needs a visit, which is clearly a problem. There needs to be some movement on this, so we're pressing hard to get some clarity on it and to try and find a process that can work, that can get us through it.
Okay, Steve, thank you very much. Definitely the best speaker we've had so far today. That might all change, but keep up the good work, and keep up the good work in terms of the council staff as well, because I'm looking at some of the questions that are coming through, and people saying that they've got their money that's come through, etc., etc. I think that's a fantastic effort. So we're now going to hear from our panel discussion. So I've got Tony Rowlands, he's Mr. Insurance Expert. Paul Dixon, Chairman of This is Rochdale and partner in Molesworth Brightclake. He is our lawyer. And we've got Lisa Wilson, partner of accountancy firm Cowgills and head of tax. So most of the questions are going to be directed, in terms of from an accountancy perspective, to yourself, Lisa. But we've also got your colleague Benjamin Day of Cowgills as well. He's going to be taking care of some of the finance questions. Tony Rowlands, you're up there in. Just tell us where you are at the moment.
I'm sat at home in Littleborough at the moment.
Okay. Well, hopefully everyone can hear you. I'm loving the wallpaper. Actually, I'm sure that's available somewhere. I always ask people a question. Tell me something about yourself that will surprise me. And you own 2 tattoo parlours as well as being an insurance expert. Now, I'm not going to ask you about tattoos. I'm going to ask you about insurance questions. Lots of discussion about business interruption insurance and whether businesses are covered by the pandemic. What's the answer to that then, Tony?
It's not a particularly good one, really. The government didn't particularly help us by making an announcement saying that when they changed the classification of the virus to a pandemic, that insurers would be picking up the tab, or they certainly intimated towards that. and that's certainly not correct. The Association of British Insurers made an announcement not long after saying, no, read your policy wording, and unfortunately not something that's covered. So no, it's not great news on that. But going forward, who knows, with insurers, they may look to give some cover, heaven forbid anything like this comes around again in the future.
So basically, 99.9% of people wouldn't be eligible for business interruption insurance.
I haven't actually seen one claim as yet that's been paid. I've seen plenty submitted. The reason being that within your policy wording, it's pretty specific about events that are covered, and there is an actual prescribed list of insured events that are covered, and there's specific reference to outbreaks, disease, virus, pandemics, and within that, rather than the government kind of intimating more towards the fact that it's a global type coverage, it's not. It's a specified list, which now COVID-19 has or will be added to the list, but obviously people took the policies prior to the virus occurring. It's just not been covered, unfortunately.
The interruption insurance is designed for things like floods and fires, and one would assume.
Yeah, particularly, yeah. I mean, the idea of business interruption is if you've got a shop, a manufacturing premises, and it burns down or it floods, it pays out your loss of gross profits, which, if this was an insured event, it'd fit right within it, but unfortunately it's just not an insured event, so not particularly the bearer of good news, and I've had plenty of discussions about it over the last month.
I was looking at some conversation that we had on the WhatsApp group, and one thing that was mentioned was about buildings being unoccupied. So it can invalidate an insurance if it's an unoccupied building for a period of 30 consecutive days. Now, obviously, lots of businesses will have locked up and they'll be working from home, or they'll be furloughing their business as well. Could that invalidate their insurance? What's your advice on that one?
There's potential for it, and I mean, I've spoke to pretty much all of the main composite insurers, so kind of your AXAs, Aviva, Royal and Sun Alliance, the main composite insurers, and they're all pulling the same line, which is that people need to check the policy wordings, make sure and see what the specific policies say, whether it's 30 days or 60 days, or in some cases there's no specific wording saying that if your premises are unoccupied for longer than a period, that either cover is not valid or limited. But what I would say is have a read of it, check it if you've got a shop, a restaurant, commercial premises, have a read through the wording, see if there is anything specifically saying about an unoccupancy clause, and if there is, drop your broker an email, your broker or your insurer an email. And I haven't seen a case so far where insurers haven't said, that's fine, we understand. Most of the insurers have already put together plans and scripts within that. It's not a major concern, but as is the way with insurance, and Paul will certainly tell you, I'm sure he's in the past argued with many insurers over contract wordings. You're better off asking the question first before there's an insured event.
Okay, I'm going to talk to you about something I knew nothing about until about 3 days ago, which is the SORN declaration, which stands for Statutory Off-Road Notice Declaration for a Vehicle. So lots of vehicles obviously are off the road at the moment for a period of time, so people are claiming the tax back, aren't they? Tell us about that.
What we're seeing more and more, certainly with commercial fleets, so if you've got people who've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 vehicles on the road normally, if they've pulled the doors to or are unable to be delivering the vehicles or to deliver the goods, or if they've got commercial travellers on the road where the vehicles are sat in the yard now and they're cashing the tax, then yeah, you can put them down as SORN. Off the back of that, it is obviously then worth you having a look at your insurance and possibly speaking either to your broker or your insurer to see if you can get some laid up cover. It's called, which in essence just covers the vehicle whilst it's sat off the road, and I can't emphasise this enough, it must be off the public highway. If you were to either remove the cover off your vehicle, or if you are to put laid up cover on, it must be off the public highway. If not, you're liable to get in trouble with the police, or you could get something through the post because it's not showing as insured. So, but certainly if you've got premises with a yard, and you can accommodate your commercial vehicles or your cars that aren't being used, see if you can speak to your insurer. And if you're paying, say, £1,000 a vehicle, they might be reduce that down to annualised down to maybe £100 a vehicle. It's a significant saving. So if you can reduce your fleet insurance cost down maybe to 90% just for the next month, 2 months, however long this is going to go on for, then yeah, it's a discussion to be having with your insurer or your broker.
It's something I'm going to talk to Lisa and to Ben about as well. Lots of help out there at the moment, hopefully, but if you need to cut your own costs as well as trying to apply for the new money, and that's one way of doing it. I want to ask you a question, if I may, about taxi drivers. A lot of people you insure are taxi drivers. Are you hearing any stories or horror stories of companies and businesses that thought they were insured, but they're not?
Yeah, I mean, we are getting plenty of that, particularly on the business interruption. I insure some large retail and nighttime economy venues, things like nightclubs, and those particularly hit the hardest so far initially, which have been the nighttime economy, so the bars, the pubs, the clubs, and the wedding venues and that kind of thing. And a lot of them were the first people on the phone to be asking about the business interruption, to be hoping that they had the cover, and we have them. So far, touch wood, other than that, we haven't seen any massive catastrophes so far. And I think that people, because a lot are sat at home, they have a bit more time on their hands, are looking through and reading through and checking to make sure that they are belt and braces.
That is the advice. Look at the small print in your cover. I'm going to come to Paul Dixon now, but I just keep thinking that Dippy's going to move. I mean, it'd be great if it did. What a story that would be. It would go global if Dippy suddenly moved. But he's not showing it.
Only for me and only at night.
Only at night. Paul Dixon, I think, first of all, actually, I should recognise the fact that your wife and both your daughters work in the NHS, doing a fantastic job on the front line. So thank you very much to that. And it must be... Yeah, absolutely. It must be incredibly proud for you to have your family, but also worrying at the same time. I mean, how are they?
They're very well, thanks. Extremely busy, as you might imagine. All three work in acute teaching hospitals, so they're on the front line. Long days for them, very busy days, but coping very well, thank you.
Okay, well, actually, thanks to them and thanks to their colleagues as well. We're going to move from that to the magic word, the F word, furlough. I'm going to ask you about 4 questions about furlough, and then at the end, because I could ask the next 2.5 hours about furloughs, but I'm going to ask the next 4 questions about the furlough to you. For those people who don't know, what is the furlough? Explain it in a nice, simple sentence.
It's important to understand what furlough isn't. It doesn't change the law. The government's initiatives have not changed the law. Furlough is a means of supporting employers and employees through this current crisis. And it's a way of paying 80% of an employer's wage bill so that he doesn't have to lay off his staff, so that he can keep them employed, but still has the funds to pay most of the employment costs.
We're going to really dig deep on this one. I've just been sent another question from Tony Bannon about furlough. I'll ask that at the end when I've spoken to all the panel. The key thing you said to me, that when it comes to furlough, employers must speak to the employees. That's the key. Otherwise, you could be setting yourself up for a fall further down the line. Just tell us about that.
Yeah. The relationship of employer and employee is governed by a contract of employment. And that contract's either a written contract, which is drawn up for the employer, or it's implied by law, because the terms and conditions of employment are implied by law if there's no contract there. That contract remains in place. Furlough doesn't change the terms of the contract. Under the terms of the contract, the employer is obliged to pay the employee's wages and salary. Furlough is a means of providing the employer with funds to pay the employee's wages during this period. The difficulty comes when the amount of money available under the furlough scheme doesn't cover the entirety of the employee's wages and national insurance and pension costs. So there has to be a conversation between employer and employee to agree to a variation of the contract.
If ever I appear on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and I get asked a question about furloughs, you're going to be the friend that I call. You absolutely are. I want to ask you another question in terms of, I was talking to Tim Fairley at PDF Fire Doors, and obviously the furlough covers 80%, but some employers are topping it up with an extra 20% from their own, cash reserves, which is something that Tim's doing at PDS. Are they legally obliged to do that or not?
Strictly speaking, yes, they are, because that's what the contract of employment provides for. But most employees understand in the current climate that if they do not support their employers and agree to accept just the furlough payment, there might be no job for them at the end of this period. There might be no job for them now.
Are furloughed staff allowed to do anything else while they're furloughed? Can they, for example, if you furloughed a member of your staff, would he or she be able to do training?
Yes. Staff who are furloughed cannot do any productive work for the business and cannot produce any income for the business, but they can do other things such as catch up on training and other ancillary activities, providing they are not producing for the business.
Right, okay. I'm going to ask Lisa a number of questions similar to what I've asked you, but in terms of the businesses, you're working out of Rochdale, you come in every day. What are the businesses saying to you at the moment? How are they managing? How are they surviving? Because the furlough money is not likely to come through until the end of April at the earliest.
Some of them are actually seeing it coming in already. It's starting to come through. Those that have not received their payments yet are having the conversation with their employees. The money will be coming back to the businesses eventually, so they are funding wages in the interim. But it's tough. A lot of businesses are finding it tough. We are all only going to get through this if we cooperate with one another. That's employers and employees cooperating with one another, and businesses cooperating with one another, and landlords and tenants cooperating with one another.
So the advice is have that conversation.
I'm sorry, Chris, say that again.
No, don't worry. The advice is have that conversation with your landlord.
Always have the conversation. Always have the conversation.
I'm going to be talking about the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, CBILS. There's a phrase I never wanted to hear again when I talk to Ben later. But just in terms of the attitude of the banks, what's your experience, Paul?
The banks are still got a long way to go from the anecdotal feedback that we're getting. Initial approaches to banks were being rejected because the businesses that really need the support wouldn't ordinarily qualify for bank loans directly from the banks, and therefore their applications have been rejected. The idea of the CBILS scheme is to support those businesses that would not ordinarily get bank finance, and it's supported by the banks getting an 80% guarantee from central government for the security for the loan. And the banks have taken a while to get up to speed on that.
If you're a business and you've got contracts in place, are you still liable for those contracts, and are your suppliers liable for their contracts, or is COVID-19 like a catch-all which will get you out of those contracts?
COVID-19 doesn't change the law, but a lot of contracts will have a force majeure clause in them, which will allow the contract to be terminated. And where the contracts do not contain a specific clause, it may be possible to establish that there's been a frustration of the contract by reason of circumstances outside the control of the parties, which allows the contract, or could allow the contract, to be terminated.
Right, okay. Thank you very much, Paul. I'm going to come to Lisa Wilson now. Don't go anywhere, though, because the furlough questions are coming in thick and furlough, quite honestly. I should say, incidentally, that normally when I do this event, we've got an audience of 150 people, and that joke would have got a raucous laugh. So right now, across Rochdale, people are laughing at my jokes, but you just can't see it. Benjamin, don't embarrass me, Benjamin, as well. I'll embarrass you with that James Milner lookalike gag that I cracked earlier. Lisa, you got a temporary job in tax 24 years ago, and you're still working in tax now, even though it was only ever meant to be for a few months. So a lot of questions about furloughing. I'm only going to ask you one for now. You heard what Paul said. What would your advice be as regards to furloughing of staff?
So obviously we've got a lot of clients and we've been speaking to them about the furlough scheme. What I would say to people is, yes, act quickly, but don't leave yourself operationally hand-tied. So I've had clients where they've furloughed everybody, but then they've realised that they haven't got anybody to do the payroll, to do the VAT returns, to do the administrative tasks. So rather than sort of just doing it, automatically for everybody, think about what the requirements of the business are going to be over this period. And then you can still defer at a later stage, but obviously don't leave yourself in a position where, you know, one of my clients had nobody to do the invoicing for the work that they'd actually done before the furlough period, so weren't going to be able to get any bills out. So just be a bit more practical in your thinking.
In terms of HMRC, obviously most of the time the money goes one way, doesn't it? But they've created a portal to get the money out. This is for furloughed work. Paul mentioned earlier that some of the money is starting to trickle through at the moment. What's your experience?
We haven't seen any money come through to clients on the furloughed scheme so far, partly because they're still in the process of building the portal. And obviously, as you can imagine, like you said, HMRC aren't used to giving money back, they're used to taking it. And as such, trying to build that portal obviously is going to take a period of time. So they've said that they're hoping that it will be operational by the end of April. There will be some testing of it, obviously, because as soon as it's open, you'll have hundreds of thousands of businesses trying to access it, and it's going to put it under significant stress. So it needs to be as robust as possible before it's introduced.
We were talking earlier, and you were saying in terms of the fact that in the short term, in this interim period, the onus is going to fall on the employer to rely on their cash reserves to get through this sticky period as well. What you're saying is actually the next tricky period will be probably the 2 months when we come out of the lockdown and everything else associated with it, because companies won't have invoices coming in, will they? And it'll take a period of time to get through it. And you're warning your clients to make sure that you're ready for another rainy day.
Yeah. So if we look at the best case scenario and say that we're interrupted for a 3-month period, obviously business during this time has a fixed cost base. Now, government measures will help some of that in the sense of the people costs. But obviously, if you take that sort of 3-month best case scenario, by the time we all go back to work, you'll have a period where people will be getting back to productivity and delivering services. So you'll have another lag where people will be getting back up to speed, doing work, but then you've got to invoice, and obviously it will take a while for cash to come through. So don't just consider the period where we're all in lockdown as being the requirement for cash. There will be a period after that where there will still be quite a significant call on cash.
I'm asking this question for a friend actually, but should people pay the tax man?
No. And obviously that is contrary to the advice that I would ordinarily be giving my clients. But at the moment, we've got some very specific measures in place where you don't need to pay your tax. So we've got VAT holiday. We've also got, the government have said that anybody that was due to make a self-assessment payment in July doesn't need to make that payment in July. But you still have to pay your other taxes. So you've got PAYE and other taxes that will be due, corporation tax say. What I would say is, if you think that you're going to be in a serious cash position because of the coronavirus, I would be calling HMRC now and getting time to pay arrangements on those taxes that aren't covered by the holiday. And I would be doing it sooner rather than later, because we don't know what the appetite of HMRC will be, say in a month's time, where we're a bit further into the crisis. So if clients and people feel that they're going to be in a sticky cash situation, I'd be looking at measures now to try and reduce the money that is going out of the business, and that will include coming to arrangements with HMRC about the tax that they need to pay.
Right, thank you for that question, David Bottomley of Rochdale Football Club. I know David's watching. That wasn't from David. That was from a friend much closer to home. It's worth saying, of course, we talk about these tax holidays, but it's only deferring what you're going to have to pay eventually. You know, the idea that you're not going to have to pay it or you're going to have to pay less is probably wide of the mark, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So some of the measures, not the furloughing scheme, obviously, but some of the other measures like the VAT holiday and the self-assessment holiday are only deferrals, and therefore the tax will be due at some point. So what businesses need to be careful is that obviously as we go through this period, and then when we're in the period of recovery, that they've got enough cash in the business to meet those liabilities as they eventually become due. And if that isn't the situation, that actually they're looking at measures to bridge the gap. So either that will be time to pay arrangements where they've agreed with HMRC that they can pay on the drip. So instead of deferring the period for a period of 6 months, that actually they've got a payment plan, effectively, that doesn't put the business under any more strain than what it's already under. And then obviously the self-assessment payments, albeit we don't need to make the payment on account in July, it will come to pass that next January, when they would have been making their balancing payment, that the July payment will be due then. So if people think that that's going to put them under pressure again, I'd be asking for time to pay arrangements.
Yeah, and honestly, the questions are coming thick and fast. So, and lots of further questions as well, including got some for insurance as well. So I am going to do those afterwards, but I don't want to interrupt the flow here. What's the advice when it comes to PAYE and corporation tax?
So again, if your business is going to be under pressure because you're paying those, and obviously let's not forget that the furloughed scheme isn't coming online until potentially at the end of this month, where you can access the portal. This is the time to call in HMRC and ask them for those time to pay arrangements. In respect of the corporation tax, we have had clients who are in what's called quarterly instalment payments. So it's very like self-assessment, where you need to pay your corporation tax in advance. So we have clients where those payments have been refunded by HMRC. So again, if you think that your tax liability is going to be lower and you've made payments on account, I'd be asking HMRC for those back.
Okay, and I want to ask you one more question before I come to Ben. It's not just about trying to bring money in. It's not just about stopping money going out as well. It's about bringing money in, and R&D tax credits are a really good way of doing that. And lots of companies, especially manufacturers, have used R&D tax credits for a number of years as well. You can do things to try and bring that forward, can't you? Try and bring some R&D tax credit money through into the system. Yeah,
so at Kegels, we've got quite a large R&D portfolio. So we're working with those clients to accelerate. That's either by accelerating the information that's coming into us in order for us to make the submission to HMRC, but also it's looking at other measures such as shortening the accounting period. Because if you've got significant R&D spend at the beginning of your accounting period, you usually have to wait until the accounting period has finished before you can make the claim, because it's got to be part of your filing responsibilities. If you've got the opportunity of accelerating that by shortening the accounting period, obviously I would be suggesting that businesses look at doing that. Also, that's true of things like capital allowances as well. So if you've got capital allowances on buildings that you've not claimed in the past, this is the time to be looking to see whether you qualify, which is real money back into the business, or at least reducing the tax that will be paid out of the business.
Right, Lisa, don't go anywhere because furlough is coming and we can't avoid it. Going to come to James Milner now. I mean, Ben Day from Cowgills. It's worth saying, actually, Ben, that you could be disappearing off screen any second now, because your wife is due to have your first child, in 10 days?
Yeah, 21st of April, so interesting time for a debut.
Okay, absolutely. Listen, all the best to her and to you for that as well. I'm going to talk to you. You're head of funding, you're director of funding at Cowgills as well. So lots of people asking about funding. What's your experience at the moment in terms of how much money is coming into the system? How much money is available when your clients contacting you?
Interesting question. I mean, from a day-to-day basis, I'm normally helping businesses with working capital solutions. Obviously now 95% of my conversations are with regards to the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, which the government has made an awful lot of money available or technically available. What's worth remembering is actually it's the bank's money that is being lent. The government are guaranteeing a portion of that money to help get it into local businesses, SMEs.
Yeah, I'm going to call it C bills for short. So
Yeah.
give us an example. Okay, so a company needs 200 grand. Okay, so where is the liability for that? Where does that cash come from?
Well, it initially comes from the bank, whoever their clearing bank is. They will lend them the 200,000. Now, what people are sort of forgetting is that once that, if for example the business falls over, still owing that 200,000, the bank can then come after yourself and the business up to a certain point. They may recover half of that money, so that still leaves 100,000 left. The government are then guaranteeing 80% of that shortfall. So whatever happens, the bank is still going to be on the hook. Now, if collectively they're lending 330 billion out, it's a lot of money to be the banks to be left on the hook with.
Which would explain the fact that the statistics that I saw, they might have been updated. There's 140,000 C-bills applications and 1,000 have gone out the door.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit hard. I mean, I'm possibly one of the first to sort of knock the banks, really, but I think it's a bit harsh because C-bills was launched on the 23rd of March, or the government rather launched it on the 23rd of March. I was speaking to bank managers 23rd, 24th, even the 25th, and the banks still hadn't sort of come up with how they were going to operate it. So they're then getting flooded with applications and phone calls from businesses to try and access this money when they didn't actually know what to do. The government sort of launched it and then left it. So we're now 2.5 weeks on, and they're starting to get their processes in place. Some are starting to automate that processes, and we are seeing some of that money starting to flow.
So your advice clearly, you're going to have to be patient. It's worth making the point, actually, this C-bills money, it's not free money, is it?
No, it's not free money. And a lot of people, because it's difficult because the government is saying how easy it is to access. Obviously, a lot of people are now it's open to abuse almost. And a lot of people think, well, this is the golden egg. My business is actually secure or will be able to struggle through this process. But hey, if there's free money from the government coming in, we'll go and apply for that. And that's what's sort of clogging up the issue as well. But, as I say, the banks are on the hook, so they have to lend partly responsibly, really, because of the abuse that the system will be under at the moment.
And if you didn't have a viable business proposition before COVID-19, if that COVID-19 comes along, it doesn't make it viable, does it? You won't get any money.
No, I mean that's another thing. They've got you've got a responsibility to the British taxpayer almost, because if you're applying for a loan and if you're a business that perhaps was trading insolvently before COVID-19 came along, and you're getting money that, okay, it's backed by the government, but ultimately, we're all going to have to pay for that shortfall, I imagine, at some stage. So, they've got a responsibility to lend the money properly, because they're going to be on the hook. And also the government, and then in turn, the British taxpayer is going to be on the hook for the shortfall.
Final question to you before I wade through the 536 questions that have come through about furloughing. Is that you think businesses have got to cut costs as well? Because one thing is that because that's what banks want to see. Banks want to see that you're taking the necessary steps to, stop the hemorrhaging of money going out the door.
Yeah, correct. I mean, the banks tend to want to know 3 things when you're applying for the C-bills money. It's how the business was trading beforehand, what the effects of COVID-19 have been on the business, and what you as a business owner has done to cut costs. And those are sort of the 3 main points that all the banks are asking for. So I think it is important to do, to make your business as lean as possible to give you the best chance of survival, really.
Right, okay. Thanks very much, and good luck with the baby as well. So I've got the questions, and I've got some that have been sent in advance, some that are appearing in the chat, and some that I'm getting WhatsApp right now. So mostly directed at Lisa and Paul as well, but there is an insurance question as well. I think we've got one rates question for Steve as well. Hi, I believe that it's acceptable to backdate furloughing of workers. I just want to clarify, is it okay to make the decision to furlough, say, next week, bracket when we hope to have funding in place to bridge payments until HMRC pay our subsequent claim, and issue a furlough agreement dated, say, 14th of April? That says the furlough start date is the 17th of March, i.e. a retrospective agreement. We are paying only 80%, so need the workers to sign the agreement when it's issued. Okay, now I'm hoping, Lisa, that makes a lot more sense to you and Paul than it does to me. So, Lisa, do you want to kick us off on that one, and I'll swap it between the two of you?
Well, my understanding of the furlough scheme is that obviously it can be backdated to the 1st of March where people weren't working. So you've got to have a point at which people were not working for the business, weren't generating revenue, and that effectively would be the date that you furloughed them. Obviously, subject to have an agreement with them that they are being furloughed. So it can operate to a certain degree retrospectively, but again, you've got to be mindful of the contract, which I think Paul probably will be picking up on what actually have they been doing during that period. Does it constitute working? And if it does, then you're not going to fall into the furloughing provisions.
Paul, what's your view?
No, I agree entirely with what Lisa said. The fundamental principles of the furlough scheme are there must be no productive work for the employee to do. They mustn't be producing for the business. They mustn't be earning an income for the business. And if those employees that the questioner is referring to have been producing work for the business during the period to date, then he can't backdate it.
Okay, I've got another question here. I think probably directed to you as well, Paul, actually, because you mentioned about furlough money. Some money's coming through, but obviously the HMRC portal's not open yet. So Hayley Thompson asks, how are people getting money back already if the portal isn't open? What's
the answer to that, and I've seen Hayley's question come up on the chat. My comments were based on anecdotal comments that I've had back from clients. What I will do after this webinar is delve down deeper into that, find out what their experiences are, and then we'll report back on the follow-up online.
Yeah, and it's worth making the point as well, actually, that we won't have all the answers today, but what we don't know today, we'll go away and we'll try and find out within reason. Nigel Jones, Managing Director of Booth Air Conditioning, has said, we employed 2 engineers just after the furlough deadline of the 28th of February. Is there any possibility that a review might take place by the government which would allow such people to be furloughed? I understand that you can be furloughed by your previous employer. However, in practical terms, it's not always straightforward. It does seem very unfair. Right, Paul, I'll start with you and then I'll bat it over to Lisa.
In answer to the question from Nigel as to whether the government's going to review this issue, I don't know. I've not got a private line into central government, but it is becoming such a significant issue that I would expect it to be reviewed by the government. The only other option is to have a conversation with the previous employers and see if they will take the employees back on so that they can be furloughed. If they re-engage the employees, they can be furloughed from the 1st of March. That, in terms, would have potential employment law ramifications for the previous employer. Those could perhaps be resolved by a short-term, fixed-term contract for the furlough period.
I suppose it depends on relationship and the terms in which and under which they left as well.
Yeah.
Lisa, you're...
Yeah, that's our experience too. We actually had a couple of people, as a firm, we had a couple of people that left us in that sort of dead zone between when the furloughing period, the payroll period of the 28th of February, and actually when the scheme was announced. And we have been, because we want to do right by those people, we have looked at ways to bring them back into the business in order that we can furlough them. The sticky bit is obviously, as Paul says, on a contractual basis, because as soon as we take them back on, they're then entitled to statutory rights such as holiday and sickness, and we're just trying to wrestle with the contractual terms to make it fair, really, because these people have left us, to go elsewhere, left on good terms. We want to see them, want to see that they can get access to funds that they would have been had access to had they stayed. But as an employer, obviously we've got to protect ourselves, and that's what we've been wrangling with.
I'm going to shake it up with an insurance question for Tony. Helen from Cleland asks, just going back to the insurance in reference to business interruption, we have in our policy wording that we are covered under, I quote, infectious diseases, and therefore are pushing this with our insurers. Do you feel that this then differs from a normal business interruption policy?
No, that's exactly the wording that that I'm making reference to. Excuse me. Yeah, it's standard in most business interruption wordings that there will be an extension for infectious diseases. There has been, that I've heard of, only one insurer, which is a Lloyd's syndicate, who's possibly got some level of ambiguity within it that has shown some merits of actually being worth fighting. It's worth the argument, it's worth the try, but in essence, if every business interruption policy was to pay out, it'd finish the whole insurance industry, which I think there'd be a few people probably happy to see, but certainly that I've heard of and that I've seen, I think that people are on a hiding to nothing with that. The wording's very specific. If anybody wants to sit and have a read, if you actually read through the infectious disease sections, there is specific and prescribed infectious diseases, which is a government prescribed list. But obviously those wordings will have been put together well prior to this coming about. So that prescribed list will change and has changed, but insurers will only be adopting it probably from the 1st of April. I would have said that they'll start looking at it. And again, you've got to beg the question at the moment. In fact, actually what I am seeing at the moment on some renewals is specific wordings excluding any cover for COVID-19 or coronavirus. So yeah, insurers are pretty clear in their message that they don't want to be paying anything out in relation to this.
Have you got any good news today, Tony? Anything? I mean, you're offering 10% off taxes.
Well, the sun's out outside. I was hoping, if I'm honest with you, the tax advisors were going to have a bit of a tough day, and I was going to have a good one, but it ain't looking that way. There's probably a lynch mob waiting for me somewhere.
I've got a question here for Steve from Derek Dixon. And once again, if we can't ask the question in this format, you know, better that we come back. With lots of businesses not paying rates, can they apply for the grant, e.g. pay the rates within the lease?
Not sure I understand that question.
Okay, yeah, I didn't understand it, Steve, but I know that you're much cleverer than me, so I thought it might make more sense to you. With lots of businesses not paying rates, can they apply for the grant, e.g. pay the rates within the lease? Derek, we will
for the business support grant.
Yeah, that's all it says.
No, the criteria for business support grants is on the website, and it is different for the 10 and 25,000, largely about size of business. But if businesses look at that, even if they're not eligible for rate relief, they may be eligible for the grant.
Got a question.
If that's the question.
I've got another question here. Once again, we might not have all the answers here. Angela Cullen, who runs a great business actually, if you are self-employed and don't have a unit or place, so you don't get a grant, how are they supposed to pay bills? And banks are rushing with loans. What help is out there? My grant won't be able to pay for 2 businesses forever. Yeah, I mean, lots of businesses are going to find themselves caught between a rock and a hard place, aren't they?
Well, the self-employment support is out there. That again is covered on the website. And again, there are gaps, and that's some of the things that we're taking up with government.
Actually, Carol Hopkins has come back in to say, in terms of Derek Dixon's question, that he's referring to where people pay rent and rates combined, which was touched upon by the earlier question. That
goes back to the Steve Barton question, which is a problem. There's no question about it. And we are in touch with government, as I said, I think earlier, that Richard Leese has written to government, and there's been direct contact as well. But it's complicated by the role of the valuation office agency in it.
I'm going to come to Karen's question in a second, but back to furlough. What is the minimum furlough period? And if a furloughed employee is brought back in, can they be refurloughed? That's from George Brigham of Ibex Marina.
Is this for me?
Yeah, that's for Paul and Lisa. That'll be a common theme, incidentally.
3 months. Sorry, 3 weeks
3 weeks
is the minimum period.
So that's obviously, that doesn't change, does it, Lisa?
No, so we've got clients where they're rotating as well, or they're intending to rotate. So they'll be bringing people in and out of furlough, and that is partly because they need a reduced workforce, but also to maintain a degree of fairness, which is something that has been of concern to my clients, is that obviously if we furlough certain people for 3 months, and maybe those people will be on full pay, and then we've got other people that are working their socks off trying to keep the business going, then there is a degree or a perception of unfairness there. So what they're planning to do is they'll have a 3-week cycle where people will come in and out of the business and go on and off furlough. So as long as you're keeping your records, and you know, and people aren't working during the furlough period, that is acceptable.
Okay, I'm going to find, I've got so many questions coming through. I feel a bit like Jeff Stelling, you know, on the assassin. Thanks for that, Jamie. James Milner. Right, so I've got a couple more furlough questions before I find Karen's question, which is about apprentices. Can you please advise how you apply for the furlough payment? As I understand that the system was not available, but your speaker has just advised that some payments are coming through. That was what was we're going to check to see if that's the case. But basically, that's from Tracy Marples. You know, how do you apply for the furlough payment? And the other question from Paul Simkus, runs a great business, Man United fan, unfortunately, so it's not all going well for Paul. Do you calculate the furlough pay for hourly paid staff with contracted hours of 37.5 hours, or their average hour, i.e. including overtime? Okay, so that's for Paul and for Lisa. Lisa, you can ask the easier question. Which one do you want to answer?
Which question do I want to answer about whether it's...
We've got one from Paul Simkus, Man United fan. Do you calculate the furlough pay for the hourly rate staff with contracted hours of 37.5 hours a week, or their average hours, i.e. including overtime? And the question for Paul will be, can you please advise how you apply for furlough payments? Okay.
Okay, so it would be the contracted hours. So that would be the figure that I would be using. Things like overtime, because they're not actually working, they wouldn't be entitled to it. So I would go with the contracted hours.
You would agree with that, Paul, would you?
It depends on the regularity of the overtime. If the overtime is regular, then it's part of the regular payments that the employee receives, and the furlough calculation should be based on that.
Yeah, we're going to come to some questions from Patrick Checham in a minute, from Gem Fire Pumps. The question I'm going to ask you from Tracy Marples is, can you please advise how you apply for the furlough payment?
If that one's addressed to me, the answer to that is it's through the portal, the HMRC portal. The comments I made earlier about some businesses saying they are seeing payments trickle through is something I'm going to have to pick up with them. Those are anecdotal comments I've had from a number of clients who were pretty quick out of the blocks. I will clarify that, and we will post after this webinar.
John Fitton's asked another furlough question. I understand that the furloughed employer can't work and do any profit generating work, but can they do admin statutory work while furloughed? I suppose that falls into the grey area category, doesn't it, Lisa?
I think there was some clarification at the weekend whereby it is acceptable for directors to be carrying on their statutory duties, such as filing accounts, etc. But anything above that, which is income generating or seem to further the business, is not permitted. What is included, what people can be doing during a furlough period, is things like training. So we have a lot of trainees in our business, and if we furloughed them, they are still entitled to do study. So we are providing that for them. But anything really that is any admin, I would say is probably not allowed, because you know, in some respects that's still furthering the interests of the business.
Got another question that's coming in. This is from Karen from Zen. Whilst on furlough, can you continue with your apprenticeship? There's a question. Does Lisa or this is like the university challenge actually, and I really think we could win something with this team, especially Tiffany. Can you continue with your apprenticeship while on furlough? Does Paul or Lisa? Do we know?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Apprenticeship is a form of contract of employment. Its employment involves training. So again, it depends what the apprentice is doing. Apprentices can be furloughed in the same way as any other employee. Trying to put it into context, I think the apprentice would not be able to do any productive work for the business, but in terms of the educational side of their apprenticeship, yes, they can continue with their training.
We've got a question from Jane Buck actually, and once again, if I don't necessarily know what the question means, I apologise. I'm hoping somebody else will. Is it acceptable to ask employees, is it acceptable to ask employees to test proposed new tech, such as a new APP, for example?
I'm sorry, what's the question again, please, Chris?
I'm sorry. The question is it acceptable to ask employees to test proposed new tech, such as a new APP, for example? And
what's an APP?
I'm assuming he means an app.
Well, it could be. It's capped up. It's capital A, capital K. Alison, can you cut Tony Rowlands off, please? Because he started to annoy me, big style. I'm going to come to a question from Patrick Chesham, director of GEM. This isn't directed at Anthony because he can't hear or see us anymore. As furlough based on continuous 3 weeks, if interrupted by bank holidays, etc., does this have an effect on the grant? So if it's minimum of 3 weeks, do bank holidays affect that? Paul?
No, they don't, because bank holidays are part of the contract of employment. Staff get paid for bank holidays. It's contractual holiday pay, so it shouldn't affect the grant because the grant should cover 80% of all the employment costs.
Okay, tell you who should be on this panel, Carol Hopkins, because she's messaging me all the time with answers. Another question from Patrick. Also, what can we do as an employer regarding holidays that have been booked for this year by an employee, but they're now not in a position where the holiday board has been cancelled, so they cannot travel? What is the employer's position regarding when or if they have to take them during 2020, or are they automatically carried over, as this could cause a second impact on the business when we finally come out of lockdown and COVID-19? Lisa, holidays. Have you got any holidays booked this year, Lisa, or not?
I'm supposed to be on holiday now, unfortunately, which is...
Listen, where would you rather be but on a virtual call with your newfound friends? Okay, so every cloud has a silver lining, but in terms of Patrick's question there, what's the situation as regards to holidays?
Well, if an employee has a holiday booked, you can still force them to take it. But I think most employers are taking a more lenient view because the government announced that they were allowing the carry forward of holidays over the next 2 years. So any holiday that doesn't get taken by an employee this year can be rolled over and taken over the next 2 consecutive years. And that's important because obviously you want to maintain the health and well-being of your people. And when we come out of lockdown, there'll be, obviously everybody will want to get productive very quickly again, or businesses will want to get productive very quickly. And then your employees may feel like they need a holiday. So being able to offer them an extended window whereby they can take that holiday is going to be very advantageous, I think, to businesses.
We're going to be wrapping up in 5 minutes, so that gives us enough time for another 37 further questions. I can update people regarding the apprenticeship question. The advice is you need to speak to your training provider, and Julia Heap from Hotwood College can provide an answer, and there are details which will be shared on the chat as regards to that as well. I've got a question here from Louise Killen, Director of LK Translations. I'm considering furloughing staff in phases, i.e. half for 3 weeks and then the other half for a second period of 3 weeks if work hasn't picked up. I want to furlough the less experienced staff first, as those with more experience add more value and are more vital to business continuity. It's no disrespect to the other younger staff, but it makes business sense. Is experiencing a firm legal basis for selection for furloughing? Yeah, is experience a legal basis for selection for furloughing, i.e. can an employer use their discretion and not to be in fear of an employee objecting on those grounds? What's the legal view on that then, Paul?
Again, it comes back to the basic principles of furlough, which is there must be no work available for that employee. So what Louise needs to do is consider how she can organise her business so that in the first instance, she needs the more experienced employees in work, and therefore there's no work for the less experienced employees that she wants to put on furlough. If the more experienced employees can complete the tasks that require their experience whilst the other employees are on furlough, then she can rotate as she proposes.
Well, okay, at least I'm going to not to ask your take on that one because time is against us. This is from Tony Bannon, great business. I'm unclear on the criteria around eligibility for the furlough reimbursements. I've got 80% of the workforce, and this is like, you know what worries me? You know that film, The Anchorman? If somebody's written something here that's rude, I'm going to read it out because I'm reading it for the first time as I talk right now. I'm unclear on the criteria around eligibility for the furlough reimbursements. I've got 8% of the workforce still working on our major contracts, all export orders, but we are not starting to run out of parts. But we are starting to run out of parts and materials because the supply chain is faltering. Within the next week, we may have to lay off a number of people due to this, even though we still have orders to be fulfilled. If we do this, will we have a valid case to reclaim the cash for furloughed employees? That's a really interesting point, actually. You know, you might be able to deliver the work, but you might not have the supply chain that can deliver the goods. Lisa?
I mean, that's still, you would still qualify, in my opinion, because essentially your business is still being interrupted by the coronavirus, by the interruptions in your supply chain. So my advice would be yes. Okay,
and the final question, at furlough, just for a change, Andrew Wilding, Managing Director of NEMA Limited. My question is, if a company has a sickness pay scheme and employees have self-isolated because of underlying health issues, does a company have to honour the sick pay scheme period, or can an employee just be furloughed? Paul, what would you say?
The answer is the employee can be furloughed if it can also be shown that there'll be no work for that employee. So again, it's a question of how he organises the business, and if he can show that there was no work for that employee and it's being carried out, such work as there is for the business is being carried out by other employees, then he can qualify for the furlough scheme.
Right, okay, listen, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much to all our speakers. Paul, it's lovely to see the blue sky in the background of Rochdale, and it's lovely to see Dippy as well, you know, looking so well, you know, at the council offices, you know, as we're going about our business. Thank you very much to all our speakers today. I've not got the figures yet, but I'm led to believe over 100 people were watching this as well. And I think a recording of this is going to be made available, probably feature on BBC One tonight at 11 o'clock if the schedules don't improve. So thank you very much for everyone's time. I'd like to mention Alison Salas as well, who's been pulling all the strings behind the scenes, actually making sure everything runs smoothly. 121 people viewed this as well, which I think is a phenomenal effort. I'd like to thank everybody here and everybody watching as well. I think Rochdale's doing a fantastic job. You see all the comments that are coming back and some of the resilience that's been shown by Rochdale businesses in the face of this terrible COVID-19 as well. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you all for taking part, and we'll be doing another one of these. I'll scare Alison if I say that tomorrow, but we are doing something called Rise and Shine on Monday, which is very informal, get together on Zoom for some Rochdale businesses as well. If you want to contact me, you can. Thanks very much for your time, and good night, Rochdale.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.